the Stop the Violence podcast. I am so excited for today's episode. Today we are going to be talking about an activist who doesn't give a fuck. He is unapologetic. He is, oh my god, like he reinvigorated the flame within me. Like, in a world where there's so many apologists, there's so many people that are like, have compassion for abusers, which I think to some degree we should. But I think everyone's taking it way too fucking hard to the point, to the point where they're being abuse sympathizers and abuser apologists and siding with abusers, really, and being complicit. And I'm just so fucking sick of that. I'm so fucking sick of people being so offended by the words we use and the tone we use and whatever the fuck when they're not offended by the cruelty going on to animals. And I feel like this person and this book that I'm going to be talking about today is going to empower those of us who are sick of that fucking shit and who actually want to fight for this justice cause for the animals. I also have a grocery store disruption tomorrow, and I'm going to be doing the speech, and I'm so fucking pumped. I'm so ready, especially after reading this book and everything that I'm going to be talking about in this episode. So definitely look forward very soon to seeing the videos of that. Please do share. This is coming out on Tuesday, so by now the disruption videos are out. Definitely share them on my YouTube, Alicia Demi, on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever, which way you want to do it. Also remember, you can always take a screen recording of YouTube videos or someone's post and repost things that way. I didn't know this for like the longest time, and now that I have like discovered the magic of screen recording, like, it helps my life so fucking much. But if not, definitely share my original content. That'll help. So my Facebook is ALISIA space KNOLL. My Instagram is Alicia Demi, ALISIADEMI. My YouTube channel is also Alicia Demi, but with a space between Alicia and Demi. I also have Stop the Violence podcast on Instagram so that you can always get episode previews and reminders of new episodes. But one thing I always forget to shout out is my TikTok. I have a TikTok. It's Alicia Demi 44, ALISIADEMI 44. Definitely support me on there if you do use the app. It's a really good app for activism. Just look at Tosh Peterson, for example. She's gotten so many views, and it's really effective because it pushes videos out to anybody. Like, it's random. It's got like the most unique algorithm. It's probably the most effective way. I have a video on TikTok that has 160,000 views. So if you're not on there already doing activism, consider doing that. I realize it's kind of a toxic app as far as sitting there and scrolling on it. But what I do is I just, like how I do with Instagram and Facebook, and I can do an episode about staying off your phone as well, but I'll post something on there and then I'll delete because, you know, the comments are toxic. Like, it's not like the most mentally healthy place to spend time, but as far as getting a message out there for the animals, it's brilliant. So I highly recommend that. So, you know what time it is. It's time for the troll of the week. Every week, I highlight a troll comment. So, our troll of the week is _breezy sideways smiley face on YouTube. They commented, "Vegans are so stupids." Yes, we are so stupids. It is so stupids to be against the psychopathic cruelty, mutilation, torture, and unnecessary killing, all of it's unnecessary, of animals. Yes, so stupids of us. Let's have a moment of silence for this troll. May they go vegan, and may they find something better to do with their time other than trolling people who are simply trying to help defend innocent, vulnerable creatures. Just a couple more things. I've been volunteering lately at Skylands Sanctuary in New Jersey. If you've enjoyed any of my vlogs or videos of the cute baby cows or any of the animals, I would greatly appreciate it if you are able to toss them a donation. It goes directly to helping the animals. They also have merch, I believe. I don't know if you can order that online right now, but either way, toss them a donation for the animals. Another thing that would be really wonderful if you tossed a donation to is, I listen to a lot of rock and metal, and the band System of a Down came out with 2 new singles for the first time since, I believe, 2005 or 2006, and they're really good songs. They're called Genocidal Humanoids and Protect the Land. The songs were written to spread awareness about what the Armenian people are going through. It's really horrible. I don't know that much about it, but if you go to systemofadown.com, I'll have it linked in the show notes. There's videos describing it, and then the link for the donation is right on there to help provide humanitarian aid. So after I record this episode, I promise I'm going to do more research into this, but basically there's a war being committed on these people during COVID, and they're kind of banking on the distraction of the world being focused on COVID. And people need to be speaking up about this. I never heard about this until just because I happen to be a fan of System of a Down, and I didn't even know until recently because I hadn't watched the music videos. So definitely systemofadown.com to learn more and to donate. I would really appreciate that. Thank you. You know what? I'm just gonna do some research into this and make my next podcast episode about this, because this is insane, and I need to learn more, and we need to be sharing this on social media. We need to be talking about this. Anyway, getting into today's episode. So today we are talking about an activist that I actually never even heard of until I heard somebody, I don't remember which podcast or who it was, unfortunately, but I just was listening to a vegan podcast, and I heard somebody mention Walter Bond and his book, Always Looking Forward, and just out of curiosity and wanting to learn more about activists that I didn't know about and what they did and everything, I bought the book, and oh my fucking god, this is such a good book. So all of my information about Walter Bond is pretty much going to come from this book, because I'm not really finding too much on the internet. I mean, this isn't somebody like Earthling Ed or someone like that. This isn't somebody who's a public figure making YouTube videos. They're somebody that does underground stuff with the Animal Liberation Front. And, this book makes arguments for unapologetic, extreme activism. Extreme not in a way that harms, but in a way that, I guess, harms property and harms, the economics, the pocketbooks of animal abusers, which I'm not against. I'm not, because there's no way that property should ever be worth more than bodies, whether you're talking about any justice movement versus another justice movement. It is outrageous that people are more angry by property being destroyed where no one gets hurt than they are by people or animals being killed. It's fucked up. So, who is Walter Bond? He is an animal rights activist who, in the summer of 2010, I'm just going to read this, hold on. In the summer of 2010, I was arrested in Denver, Colorado for setting fire to 3 businesses across 2 states, the sheepskin factory in Denver, the leather factory in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the Tiburon restaurant in Sandy, Utah, which sold foie gras and other once vibrant, wild, and exotic animals. So, as an act of the Animal Liberation Front, he set fire to these places without harming any people or animals. He took the proper precautions not to harm. And he also had set fire to a millionaire drug dealer's meth house in 1997. He went to prison for 4 years for doing that. He's also straight edge, by the way, which I, after reading this, am like really considering being straight edge because I already don't consume like substances. But anyway, and then he went to prison for setting fire to the sheepskin factory, the restaurant, and the other place in 2010, and I'm pretty sure he got out in 2020 or somewhat recently. I'm not 100% sure. On the website it says he is now free, but yeah, he did a whole decade in prison for burning buildings down in a place where like rapists get 3 months in prison. Like, this is the world we're in. Like, activists are so unfairly prosecuted, and activists who don't even do any harm, and they label him as a terrorist. It's just absolutely insane that our society values inanimate objects more than living beings. And he almost would have gotten away with these arsons and continued to do more for the animals. However, his brother outed him for the cash reward from the FBI, and it's such a shame. It kind of, like, reading the story about that reminds me of, like, not falling for toxic people of your past, like, creeping back into your past and, you know, playing into the nostalgia and the happy memories of people. It's kind of like when people show you who they are, believe them. That's a big lesson I'm learning as a side note of just, like, not romanticizing making up with people from the past who really aren't capable of making up. So, anyway, side tangent. But anyway, this book is the compilation of many essays that he wrote while he was in prison, and I don't know if there's more essays besides this. I need to still look into that, but I'm just going to read a lot of quotes and passages from the book, basically, and I think you'll find them very motivating. Okay, so here is a quote. "To have greater knowledge of these issues than the general public and not speak out is complicity. Please do not be complicit in the Holocaust against animals and the earth. To my detractors, take a look at what you are defending. If it's not wrong to use and exploit animals, then go visit a slaughterhouse and see for yourselves what happens behind those walls. If you can't eat your meal and view how it's produced at the same time, then eating animals is very clearly wrong. Just because we as individuals and societies have the ability to exploit animals does not give us the right to do so. Once upon a time, it was acceptable for men to exploit women, and those who stood against it were considered criminals. Now women can vote, read, and work. Once upon a time, it was legal to own human slaves, and those who stood against it were beaten, imprisoned, and murdered. Now that level of racism is unthinkable. Today, animals are the oppressed, and the excuses to use them are the same excuses the slave owners used. Those excuses are equally invalid when applied to animal enslavement and exploitation." Okay, so this next quote is him describing the fact that he used to, for a short time, work at a job where he helped build slaughterhouses and what he witnessed while doing that. That inspired him to ultimately go vegan. "Then came the day that changed me. We were wrapping up all our tools and cleaning up when a hog who had been knocked out with an electric bolt, had his throat stuck, and had been hung upside down to bleed to death, woke up, convulsed, and freed himself of the foothold. He came running off of the kill floor straight toward me and the rest of the crew. 3 IBP workers gave chase, 1 with a pipe wrench and 2 with baseball bats. They began to beat the hog to death. I turned away as I thought anyone would. I was wrong. As I turned, I was face to face with the rest of my crew. While listening to the thuds and squeals of a blunt force death a mere 30 feet behind me, I watched as my coworkers whooped and cheered, high-fiving each other each time there was a thud, laughing and celebrating the violent death of a sentient being." And then later it says that the boss or whoever else began heckling him and called them a born-again tree hugger, and he had the courage to quit the job on the spot. And then he went home and studied animal rights. So that's brilliant. I feel like any person who doesn't have something seriously wrong with their head or who isn't seriously just programmed or who doesn't have toxic masculinity trying to, like, joke around with the boys would have that response. Like, that is the empathic, normal thinking human response to an injustice. So I like this next passage as well. Like all industries of animal exploitation, the circle of abuse will end with the antagonist, humans, falling prey to its own perfidiousness. I don't know that word. For instance, my grandfather was a hog farmer whom I never met. He died in the year of my birth after the ammonia from hog waste destroyed his lungs. That same waste runoff from his and adjoining hog farms in the 70s poisoned the groundwater, allowing illegal levels of radium to pollute the tap water. To this day, in certain areas of the Midwest, you have to sign a waiver stating that the water from public works is hazardous to your health and that you are okay with that before they will turn your water on. And that's so fucked up because I guarantee you that people just sign it just like they click agree on, like, the Apple terms and conditions. So that's, if you didn't know, research how animal agriculture poisons waters, how slaughterhouses poisons the water of the communities that live in it, which are usually black and brown people, usually poor people. So yeah, look into that if you haven't yet. Here's another quote that I really like. Being courageous. By courage, I mean not succumbing to fear when the task at hand demands it. A simple and casual example of this is simply saying what an animal in a cage would want you to say. Far too often, I have seen quote activists fall into this "you have to meet people where they are" school of thought. No, you don't. How people react to the truth is not your responsibility. You cannot always challenge the status quo and be seen as part of it all at the same time. Oh, I love that. I have allowed far too many people to shame me into being more apologetic and being, like, just way too sympathetic to abusers, and at the end of the day, my job is to spread the facts and spread the truth, and it is not my responsibility if feelings are hurt. It's the truth that's hurting you, not someone speaking the truth. Like, don't shoot the messenger. It's not my responsibility what you do with the information. It's just my responsibility to spread the information. Another great quote. Animals are suffering and dying now, so we should be confronting and saving their lives now. It's not very complicated. In order to be bold and unafraid, it helps to learn to internalize the message. One trait of a coward is that their number one priority is their own absolute safety and comfort. Any tactic that threatens that is always reflexively seen as wrong, no matter how effective it obviously is. Look at it this way. If it was you on the chopping block, would you want someone to act on your behalf or have a really interesting philosophical conversation about your impending doom and how we're going to reform the way it's done by the year 2045? Cowardice is not a virtue, and courage is no vice. I mean, I would say that you should always prioritize your safety, obviously. I mean, there are people in this movement who are willing to die for the cause. I'm not going to advocate for you to, like, take things that far. Like, prioritize your safety of, like, your life. But I agree when he says, it's stupid to prioritize your comfort. And I think that's mostly what he's talking about. Like, feeling cushy and, like, people-pleasing and well-liked by others. Like, that should not be a priority when there are animals dying. So another quote that I like. No matter how, quote, well within your rights, quote, you are, or, quote, opposed to illegal activity, quote, you may be, you don't decide the resistance you will meet. Some cop, fed, or agent does, and they are nothing more than security guards for private corporate interests. In a consumer society, you have the right to purchase things and shut up. And I wrote next to this that the cops were called on me for using chalk. I have a video of that on my YouTube if you're interested. The bottom line is legality does not equal morality, and it shouldn't even need to be said, but there is endless corruption within our policing and our justice system. Not to say it's all corrupt or that it's all bad, of course, but to deny any existence of that is just denying reality. Okay, I love this next quote because it explains, like, how I really feel a lot of the times and, like, what I kind of really want to say. I had talked with enough people by this point to see that deep down inside not everyone is a caring vegan. Lots of people don't care at all for animals. They just have a cat and dog fetish. They just have cat and dog fetishes, or they care right up to the point where you ask them to stop eating the dead carcasses of murdered animals. I found many people far more outraged by the fact that I was bringing the issues up than at the issues themselves. Apparently, if you support death and slavery 3 times a day, that's not a problem. But if I point that fact out, then I'm the asshole. Another quote. We have a mechanical urge to relate everything strictly in terms of personal worth. In other words, we are taught from day one to view the world solely from our point of view, the human-centric and human-supreme. And that's mostly contemporary Western Eurocentric society he's referring to. Next to this, I wrote down, animals and humans only deserve our help if we know them personally mentality, out of sight, out of mind. Like, yeah, how many times have you seen people who, you talk about, like, a dead dog and they say, oh, that sucks. But if it was their dead dog, they would need to take, 2 weeks off of work to grieve. And you know what I mean? So it's just we need to stop having this mentality that we either need to know someone or have, our ego benefited by someone or some animal in order to care about their right to bodily autonomy and their right to their own life. Okay, so I love this next part. Go vegan. As true abolitionist animal liberation activists, we do not value property or business over life. He talks about welfareists and he talks about having conversations. I'll just read it. Having sit-downs with ranchers to let the rest of us know they are really nice people, just like you and me. Just like you and me, except that they kill for a living and seek to kill more and profit more year after bloody year. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you look at Rowdy Girl Sanctuary, they have an advocacy program for ranchers to switch to vegan, and I think that's great. And I think, there is a lot of positivity in ex-ranchers gone vegan being able to relate with ranchers and stuff like that. But at the same time, we shouldn't take that so far to where we're being abuser sympathizers or abuser apologists. You know what I mean? So here's something that really bugs me. They all seem to believe that if people think you are nice, they will just radically change their lives to be just like you. How many fucking times have I heard either people tell me or vegans say, just lead by example. Don't force it on them. No. Fuck that. If you make zero efforts to talk about animal rights, people are going to look at you and be like, oh wow, they have a healthy diet. Wish I could do that, but I can't, LOL. He also points out that respect for authority in law is promoted with religious zeal. Yeah. I disagree with, I think there's obvious corruption in law and authority. And not all the time, but we can't just, bow down to everything. Because they're not looking out for us. They're not looking out for anybody really but themselves in a lot of cases, not all. Okay, I fucking love this next quote. But there can be no fight without confrontation. In this day and age, we are all programmed not to confront anything. Practice speaking truth instead of biting your tongue. Of course, there are times to use tact. I wouldn't go to dinner and call my grandmother a flesh-eating bastard. But as a central rule when protesting, tabling, or otherwise on the clock for animal rights, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything nice. Woo! I'm gonna start using that. If you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything nice. Don't be an abuser, sympathizer, apologist. Don't be like, oh yeah, that's okay that you're taking baby steps. You know what I mean? Let's end that shit. I mean, if you really want to be that way, you can, but I'm arguing against it. Okay, so the next couple of quotes are going to be, again, from when he worked on the slaughterhouse and witnessed things. At least 3 hogs per truck will be deemed unfit for human consumption, usually due to huge abscesses on their hind legs. This happens because a few hogs per trailer always get their rear stuck against the air hole grating. When this happens, their hindquarters become horrifically blistered from a 30-hour ride in this condition. Imagine sitting on a school bus with no pants and a cheese grater for a seat. Any hogs that absolutely cannot be used get thrown out behind the facility to either die of exposure or to starve to death. Drivers or IBP supervisors stabbing hogs in the hind legs with pocket knives to pop abscesses and continue business as usual. I skipped around there a little bit to the parts that I underlined. All the hogs get forced into this single-file death run made of tubular steel. Once inside the chute, they are on a death march. They cannot turn around because of the steady flow of their doomed brethren being forced in behind them. They cannot stop. Hogs have the cognitive ability of a 5-year-old child. They are very smart and very aware what's happening. They tremor from fear. Some are so frightened they lose control of their bodily functions. Others faint and get pushed along their bellies to death. Once at the top of the chute, there is an abrupt 45-degree ramp, at the top of which an electrified bolt thrusts out and jolts the hog in the head to knock them out. They then land unconscious or awake and paralyzed on the conveyor belt. Here they meet the sticker. The sticker has the job of stabbing the hogs in the throat and shackling their hind legs so that they bleed to death while hanging upside down. At the IBP plant in Perry, Iowa, the stickers wear hockey masks so that if a hog regains consciousness prematurely and kicks them in the face, they will be protected. Can you imagine being hung upside down by a lunatic in a hockey mask and having your throat cut? So much for your welfarist, humane slaughter. Very quickly, they awaken gushing blood from the throat, traveling upside down in a corridor of congealing blood. The floor beneath is pitched at a 45-degree angle so that much of the blood drains into the blood tanks at one level beneath the kill floor in a department called rendering. As they awaken, they begin kicking and panicking. This is good according to the industry standards because it quickens the bleed out. At the pinnacle of this A-frame shackled drive, the slow ride is over. They slide along the shackled channel very fast, approximately 35 feet descent and 40 feet in length. Because of this acute slide angle, approximately 1 in every 100 hogs fall from the shackle and end up on the floor beneath. There they stay drenched in the blood that rains down from the sliders above. Hopefully by the time they reach this point, they are dead, but that is not always the case. The first machine is the beater. This machine is much like the rollers of a car wash, except that the rollers have thick nylon ropes with knots on the ends. The machine beats the hair off of the hogs. Next is the washer. This is a long, scalding, hot water bath/basin. This gets the residual hair that the beater missed and softens the skin for disassembly. From this point, everything works at a breakneck pace. And here's something that I didn't always know, but gelatins and lards get shoved into everything from cupcakes and Twinkies to car and truck tires. Blood gets used for rennet, an adhesive, and oddly enough, an ingredient in cheese. Sorry, vegetarians, but your cheese is not vegetarian. It's a combination of lactation and blood. I did not know that. That's fucking disgusting. And as for putting it in things like truck tires, you know, if we had a vegan world, we'd be putting something different in those tires. Like, it's not like this is the only thing. So gross. Okay, and this next excerpt really rings true with all of the things that I mentioned in my episode, paying for animal products equals paying for human rights violations, where I talked about how the humans are exploited in slaughter work, and the story is pretty much the same everywhere, and this next excerpt echoes that yet again. The white hats were all African immigrants except for the cleanup crews, which were all Latino immigrants. The white hats run the kill floor, rendering and stacking and salting skins. They are paid the bare minimum and allowed no leeway whatsoever. They work 12-hour shifts with a 20-minute lunch and 2 10-minute breaks. They are constantly threatened with write-ups for the slightest deviation from the rules or slowdown in production. 3 write-ups within 6 months and they're fired, turned into immigration and deported. Approximately 1 out of 5 white hats is missing a finger or part of their finger from working at ridiculously frantic pace with pneumatic scissors and saws. Keep in mind you're also paying for this when you buy animal products. So now he talks about, like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, don't they have regulations? Don't they have certain ways they need to be operating? Why don't we just shut down the slaughterhouses that aren't following those regulations? But, well, Anybody that works in a slaughterhouse sees so many health violations occur in a day that you couldn't keep count of all of them if you tried. The whitecoats know this, so the way it goes is no surprise. Literally, no surprise visits. 3 days before a USDA inspector visits, the slaughterhouse is alerted. Like, what? Why are they alerted? A massive cleanup is initiated on the day of inspection. The whitecoats walk from one end of the plant to the other with their face buried in a clipboard and flanked on either side by green hats. The kill line is temporarily slowed down while they're in the building. The whole inspection takes about a half hour. Before the USDA can even leave the parking lot, it's back to breakneck pace and filthy gore. So, clearly that means nothing, that these places, they're not getting checked on. They're being warned before the people even come to check. It's nonsense. And I love this quote right here. Why did I not personally intervene when I had the chance? Why did it take me several years after bearing witness to this atrocity to seriously begin speaking out and fighting against it? The answer to all these questions is one word: speciesism. So here is like a shocking quote. All the animals that die annually for fur entertainment and vivisection globally, those numbers of dead are equaled by the American meatpacking industry in one day. Over half of our fresh water, drinking water, goes to livestock. The number one polluter of our water is runoff, aka shit from farmed animals. The number one culprit of deforestation and displacement of indigenous people is the meat industry. Okay, I love this from the Q&A article. Why do you exclusively promote veganism? Many things are grayly subjective, but within that gray area are points of black and white. Animal exploitation is one of those points of black and white. Just as racism is wrong under any circumstances, so it is that discrimination on the basis of species is wrong. As such, you are making consumer-based decisions that perpetuate animal slavery, suffering, and death, or you are not. And this is a response of not supporting illegal direct action. How would it have been possible to be an abolitionist in the days of slavery and to not support the Underground Railroad? That would be patently ridiculous. It bears mentioning that not all abolitionists were part of the Underground Railroad, but certainly none were against it. So basically, not all vegan activists have to take illegal direct action, but it doesn't really make sense to be against illegal direct action. Another good quote. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pacifist but never ceased to actively engage the system. He put himself and his followers in harm's way time and time again. He did not stop until he was assassinated. Direct action is 99% of the time nonviolent, but it does require courage 100% of the time. As a side note, definitely look into the assassination of MLK. The Mile Higher podcast has an episode about that. There was definitely some shady shit going on, and a lot of why he was killed is because he branched out from talking about just civil rights to talking about other things such as like economic disparities and things like that, and the feds didn't want him talking about that. And yeah, just look into that more, because that's like, oof, wow. And another answer to a question. But what about arson as a tactic? That's violent. He says, I would disagree. Violence cannot be inflicted upon a piece of property. It can only be destroyed. Can we have a round of applause, please? It's this attitude of violence to property that is the fly in the ointment. Violence can only be visited upon sentient life, beings with an interest in being free of pain and suffering. If you punch a wall, you've only done violence to your hand, not the wall. Woo! Yes. Another question and answer. Wouldn't you win more people to your cause if you were not so accusatory and extreme? He answers, no matter your position or attitude on one thing or another, there will always be those who agree with you or don't. The animal liberation movement is already rife with lukewarm activists. Our purpose as abolitionists is to effect change, not to convince the morally blind. What happens to animals is a form of the most horrific torture imaginable. In our opinion, the response to such must be in kind. Okay, so Walter Bond is such like a badass that sticks to his beliefs that he even sticks to them like so unapologetically in his final statements to the courts. So this is his final statement to the court in Colorado in 2011. I'm just going to read a few quotes from it. Any system of law that values the rights of the oppressor over the downtrodden is an unjust system. And though this court has real and actual power, I question its morality. I doubt the court is interested in the precautions that I took to not harm any person or bystander, and even less concerned with the miserable lives that sheep, cows, and mink had to endure unto death so that a Colorado business could profit from their confinement, enslavement, and murder. Obviously, the owners and employees of the sheepskin factory do not care either, or they would not be involved in such a sinister and macabre blood trade. So I will not waste my breath where it will only fall on deaf ears. That's why I turned to illegal direct action to begin with, because you do not care. No matter how much we animal rights activists talk or reason with you, you do not care. Ooh, this next quote. I love it. I love it. It has been said, all it takes for evil to conquer is for good people to do nothing. Conversely, all it takes to stop the enslavement, use, abuse, and murder of other than human animals is the resolve to fight on their behalf. So he also talks about how the media told a bunch of lies to vilify him when this was all going down. For example, they accused him of petty thievery, homophobia, eating beef, and burning a meth dealer's pet, which are not true. And he makes the good point that if they were going to bring up the past to assassinate his character, they should have gone to the fact that he used to help build slaughterhouses. So here's a fact. Every second, 321 farmed animals are slaughtered. And then he later says, did you know that you don't even reach 1 billion seconds of age until nearly 35 years old? It's important to remind ourselves of things like that because the human mind can't really conceptualize the number 1 billion. And then when you multiply that by multiple billions, it's so this is what's happening to animals is clearly the largest injustice by number of bodies that has ever occurred. He also got a lot of criticism for, there might have been mice in the walls or, other sort of unknown critters while he burned the buildings down. And he says, if you saw a man skin a cat in a field so that he could sell its pelt, would you not run over and stop him because you might step on a mouse unseen in the grass? And that's a good point, and it's really just similar to the crop deaths though nonsense. Attempting to appeal to hypocrisy to soothe one's own guilt. He says, if you were in a cage being raped, beaten, and violently tortured and murdered, you would want someone to liberate you, stop your torturer with brute force, and the building that they held you in to be burnt to the ground. You're only a pacifist when it's not your neck on the chopping block. That's such a good point. For real. So again, in this section, he's defending, the use of, burning inanimate objects and breaking inanimate objects. So he says, even as I write this, I can hear the hysterics of apathetic animal rights activists' misplaced contention. Really, why don't you lose your marbles over the fact that U.S. soldiers have been murdering brown people in the desert for over a decade straight? Where's your outrage when police execute blacks on camera and in public? True to pacifist hypocrisy, you aren't appalled by violence, you're appalled by unsanctioned violence. Ooh, definitely something to think about and consider. It goes on, this is because many of our own activists are as insane as the society they live in. If you are more freaked out by the statement, not restricted by a philosophy of nonviolence, than you were with the statement, every second 321 farm animals are slaughtered, then this is testimony to your faulty morality. Yeah, and I mean, especially when you think about the fact that what he's talking about is not even violence against living beings, unless, of course, in defense. And here's another good quote that I liked. As long as vegans and so-called animal rights activists succumb to compassionate apathy, then the rest of us are obligated to become fire-breathing fanatics. Alright, so another quote. Many of us that take a militant or hard stand on the issue of animal liberation have been approached at one time or another and asked by other so-called activists why we don't spend more time people-pleasing and politicking. The general idea is that if you appeal to people's conscience instead of their outrage, you will win more people over to the cause. Perhaps you can attract more flies with sugar than vinegar. However, like most welfarist ideology, there is a lot of oversimplification and faulty logic to contend with. And it continues later. The idea that tactics are right or wrong is an elitist and cowardly approach. It is only the ends that are right or wrong. If yelling and protesting angrily work, then they are moral because the end goal is to be effective against animal abuse. But if your end goal is for everyone to think you are a nice person, then yelling and aggressive protests are clearly wrong. And this is the line between those that truly care, the above ground, and those that are simply posturing, albeit compassionately. Another untruth is that by being aggressive, you will turn others off to the cause. The truth is, like attracts like. If you promote animal liberation with militancy and fanaticism, then that type of person you will attract. And that is what this so-called above-ground movement needs. Lukewarm activists are turning veganism into a diet fad and animal rights into a philosophy, while diets and interest in conversations are not saving animals. And it goes on. There's only one movement, the one that moves. You want to partake in it? Then get active, get passionate, and confront, agitate, and educate. Study other social justice movements before us that have had levels of success that we have yet to reach. Groups such as the Black Panthers, John Africa's Move, American Indian Movement, and suffragettes all employed winning tactics that work when employed by any group no matter what the cause. The words of Malcolm X, Screaming Wolf, and Sitting Bull are timeless and just waiting for us to rediscover and apply them to today's liberation struggles. The animal liberation movement has so much in common with so many other struggles, past and present. I want to see us united in a struggle for the total liberation of Earth, animals, and humans. But before we will ever be taken seriously by others, we must take ourselves seriously. Real recognizes real. And until we quit begging for care and understanding like supplicants, we will never attain the warrior element that it takes to not only win battles and save our animal sisters and brothers, but also attain a truly revolutionary status, which we must, because a change as radical as freeing the enslaved only happens by force of will. Those who profit from slavery and death only stop when they are made to. Ooh, okay, I love this next passage. When we fashion our intellectualism around our love, passion, and ferocity, two incredibly important things happen. First, we will attract other passionate people. Second, no matter what the outcome of the conversation, you will speak authoritatively instead of playing on people's sympathy, which always comes across as weak. Such a good point. Such something that I need to remember when I'm doing outreach. Next, when we speak for the animals, we do not need to be constantly concerned with how people will take it or if they can handle it. This overly concerned mentality of how your points will be perceived leads to all kinds of problems and compromises. Our responsibility is to say what needs to be said, not how people will take it. Trust me on this. I know I can write a brief paragraph and 100 people will see it from 50 different perspectives. If you become worried about how everyone takes things, you will quickly find yourself constantly explaining what you meant. No matter what anyone thinks about a statement like animals exist for their own intents and purposes, not human ends, it is incredibly important that it's said. Ooh, for me, that's like one of the most important quotes of this book. Another quote. We need to always challenge the validity of animal enterprises. The idea that meat eaters need animal flesh, the idea that hunters need to help control animal populations. Side note, Earthling Ed has already debunked all hunter arguments. Check him out. The idea that animals want to be used by humans, or the idea that God has given us dominion, are pure bullshit. People profit off of, or are in some way personally gratified by, animal exploitation and murder. All their arguments to the contrary are just word games to justify what they want to do in the first place. Yep. Ooh, this next quote is so powerful. It's vastly more important that we speak the truth for animals and their agenda of animal liberation than we often think. A compromised voice for others invariably leads to compromised actions. Let me say that again. A compromised voice for others invariably leads to compromised actions. Ooh, I love this quote. Your rights end where another's begins. Contrary to consumer-driven society, every time you have a craving or desire, it does not mean you have a right to fulfill that craving. Ooh, love it. I love the topic of this next part. I do not subscribe to the idea that it is all right to kill animals with impunity because you are brown or have cultural reasons for doing so. Sorry, but I'm an animal liberation activist, and there are several thousand species, varieties, and types of animals globally suffering terrible lives and deaths, and even extinction at the hands of speciesist humans and oppressors in America, Mexico, Canada, China, India, Australia, Europe, Africa, and elsewhere. We are not racist or sexist. We are not imperialists or bigots. We are animal liberation activists. We are abolitionists, and as such, we extend our compassion, concern, ferocity, and energy towards the liberation of all life. If that interferes with anyone's human supremacy, so be it. The idea that you must choose humans or animals isn't always the case, but if we must, then we choose animals. Why? Because they are innocent. Deers do not dress up in urban camouflage and come to your neighborhood and shoot you in the face and then mount you and your family's heads in their living space. Chickens do not build mechanized slaughterhouses and raise genetically modified and domesticated people to murder at a breakneck pace, or enslave us for eggs. Animals do not make up ridiculous religions that demand human sacrifices to appease the imaginary men in the sky. They do not farm us for our skin, eat our brains, make twisted sex videos involving our deaths, involve us in cage fights, put our children in veal crates, and force feed them liquid diets. They do not beat us up in rodeos, stab us to death in crowded arenas, mount our skulls on the front of trucks. Elephants do not enslave or beat us until we perform for them like puppets. Tigers do not sentence us to a life in a cage so that they can display us in a zoo. Snakes do not skin us alive to make us belts, etc., etc., etc. He goes on later to say, I have met vegan Rastas from Jamaica. I have known and helped with a vegan soup kitchen run by blacks and for blacks in the inner city of Denver. I have read hundreds of communiques by vegan warriors of the ALF and ELF of Mexico. I have met Africans that have killed poachers in Africa, and I myself am Latino. Many Food Not Bombs groups feed the homeless vegan meals every week. Most of the vegan and AR community are predominantly women. So this idea that veganism is a white or elitist culture is an image that advertisers perpetuate so that they can hike up the prices by putting big green V's all over packages. Ugh, so true. Also, if you want to learn more about a consistent anti-oppression, inclusive animal rights group, check out Vegan Activist Alliance. The leaders of this, Tom Ramage and Eloise Trinidad, have taken over the Live Vegan podcast, and they talk about, they feed the homeless plant-based food in New York City. It's great. Now, of course, have your own opinion about, Africans killing poachers and stuff. Have your own opinion about that, of course, but Walter Bond is not telling people to kill humans for animal liberation. If anything, he's just telling them to support animal rescues, to go to sanctuaries, to support, not even just to do it yourself, but to just not be against people who do take that step to destroy inanimate objects in order to make a point. That's it. If you don't know about the ALF, do some research into it. I need to do some more research myself, but they take precautions not to harm any living beings. So yeah, it's basically the idea of only harming if it's truly in self-defense. Another quote, when you build huge mechanized civilizations off of the blood and bones of suffering and murdered animals and the decimation of the natural world, that at the end of the day you will reap what you sow. How hard is it to comprehend that a fair and equitable society will never come from the rape, slavery, murder, and theft of its indigenous population, or the slavery and displacement of a race? As surely as 2 + 2 = 4, oppression plus murder equals self-destruction, whether by violent revolution or moral degradation. And I wrote next to it, pandemics. Obviously, this is pre-pandemic written. Pandemic caused by wet markets. Hello. Another quote. We see the abuses to animals in vivisection, meat, dairy, and eggs or fur, and then we start filing it away as what this means in a social context and what tactics have the most universal appeal to other humans. When we should be asking ourselves practical questions like, how can I start fighting these abusers? Or, where can I have the most impact against these cruelties? How can I save an animal today or stop these atrocities now, even just for a few critters? So he also talks again about the Black Panthers, and he says various police and feds were executing these brothers and sisters because they were demanding an end to institutionalized racism that was destroying their communities, and they were not going to back down no matter what. Also, amongst their own people, they were at times blamed for their hard stance, bringing down the heat and making it hard for everyone else. Predictable. Within our own movement, it's nothing new. Anti-vivisectionists were actually called terrorists over 100 years ago. Ronnie Lee, the founder of the Animal Liberation Front, was being called a terrorist in a court of law in 1982. He talks about, the feds and, the enforcers of law and whatnot, the government, whoever else, using fear and intimidation and arresting certain individuals like himself to basically just scare everyone else into not speaking up and not doing anything, and especially not speaking up, because speaking up inspires other people. And he says, don't let this system use us, meaning the people who have been arrested, to scare you. And he also talks about how we shouldn't allow them to have us have basically a cop in our head giving us paranoia and policing us on what we do. It's they don't even have to do it. They're doing it by just being in your head. A quote, you have the right to say what is happening, you have a right to say what the solutions are, and you have a right to your own opinions, and you have a right to fight against murder, torture, and slavery. You have those rights because you assert them, not because a government agency tells you that you do. Another excerpt. When I broke into Tandy Leather, I lit the bolts of leather and cash register on fire to show my disdain for the practice of profiting from blatant murder of not just the animal nations, but also Mother Earth, which is daily poisoned with cancerous and hazardous chemicals from the tanneries that supply Tandy Leather stores nationwide. In interjection, they also poison the humans that are forced to work there. I think it's in Bangladesh, I'm not sure, but where a lot of leather tanneries are, and the life expectancy for the workers dealing with those chemicals is fucking 40. So he goes on to say, this sick capitalist system wants us to always concentrate on these perpetrators as if they were victims. I don't buy that, not for 1 minute, because if they are the victims of injustice, it is only the same injustice that slaveholders suffered when robbed of their slaves. It's only the same form of injustice that the Nazis suffered for just going along with orders and being, quote, good Germans. And it's the same injustice that Christians perceive as out to get them, even though they run the entire Western Hemisphere of the globe. The victims are the piles of dead and broken bodies that wanted to not be skinned alive for a buck, not their task and slave masters. Okay, now I want to read some excerpts from his final statement to the court in Utah. I'm sorry that when I was 19 years old, I built 2 slaughterhouses that are still killing animals, even now as I speak. I'm sorry that Tandy Leather sells skin that has been ripped from the dead and often live bodies of such animals as cows, ostriches, rabbits, snakes, and pigs. I am sorry that the leather tanneries that supply Tandy Factory poison the earth with dangerous chemicals. I am sorry that the restaurant Tiburon profits from the force-feeding of geese and ducks until their livers explode, so that rich people can use that as a pâté for crackers and bread. I am sorry that they make a living from the dead bodies of wild and exotic animals. I am sorry that we live in a day and age where you can rape a child or beat a woman unconscious and receive less prison time than an animal rights activist that attacked property instead of people. Whew! Damn! I realize that the laws of the land favor a business's ability to make a profit over an animal's right to life. It also used to favor a white business owner's ability to profit from a black person's slavery. It also used to favor a husband's ability to viciously attack his wife and act on her as if she were an object. Those who broke the law and damaged property to stand against these oppressions were also called terrorists and fanatics in their time, but that did not change the fact that society progressed and is still progressing along those lines. Another quote, perhaps a less brutal and less violent society will one day exist that will understand that life and earth are more important than products of death and cruelty. Damn. And then he ends this by saying, you can take my freedom, but you can't have my submission. So moving on to where he starts talking about straight edge. So a quote, part of having a revolutionary mentality means we examine our beliefs and actions and then discard those which don't fit in the world in which we want to live. We first make this change in ourselves and then initiate that change in the world around us. I want to live in a world where the earth and animals get to live and flourish. I want to live in a world without racism. I want to live in a world where our mothers and sisters are not preyed upon in the streets or in their homes. I want to live in a world that has respect for all innocent life, and I want to live in a world without the self-destruction and diminished capacity of inebriation. Whew. Amazing. Another really good quote. It's fairly obvious that the oppression that animals endure follows the same patterns, relationships, and psychology as many human forms of oppression, i.e. racism, consumerism, capitalism, etc. There is no denying those correlations, and as such, we take our rightful place among the various liberation struggles. So a quote, huge drug companies like AstraZeneca are enormous contributors and funders of animal experimentation. Many vivisector lunatics like David Tiller Jenst make a living addicting primates to street drugs when there is already a world of addicted human primates to observe and monitor. Whole countries like current-day Mexico are engaged in civil war and bloodshed in the streets over drug cartels. True narco-terrorism, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. Many have been through the hell of addiction and survived, or been the victims of loved ones' addictions or alcoholism, definitely have more of a real-world awareness of how deep the rabbit hole actually goes. Therefore, straight edge should be viewed as a way of life which is a good for all, just like veganism. Which brings me to my next point. I feel that straight edge should be synonymous with veganism, social justice, and respect for all innocent life. The immediate point of living drug-free is to make the individual optimal, thereby bettering the world we come in contact with, because no person is an island. We affect our surroundings, many times more than we know. But for the sake of clarity and consistency, veganism and straight edge must truly be seen as extensions of one another. He also talks about the importance of being sober when you're, fighting a revolution. So that pretty much summarizes the bulk of the book with all the essays, and now there's just interviews in the back, and I'm just going to read some quotes. Especially this one. This one hit me so freaking hard. The only thing worse than not knowing your purpose in this life is to know that purpose but not be able to summon the courage to walk the walk. So I was unhappy. Oh my god. And he's referring to before he became active and having these beliefs but not really acting on them. And oh my god, this hits me. This hits me with activism. This also hits me with music, all my dreams of singing and playing music and writing songs and all that. Oh god, that hits. I really like this quote. Everyone seems to sit around and wait for some mythical caring person to step in and right all the perceived wrongs they see all around them, or they don't act until directed. I have found that when I rely on myself, I get way more accomplished than waiting to be validated by someone or some group. So this quote is actually from one of the interviewers, NIO, not really sure what NIO stands for, but they said, I believe that fear is one of the greatest weapons the oppressors use to manipulate and marginalize activists. Activists allow themselves to be controlled through fear, and many become puppets. So this here is a good passage. This is his answer. to the question, he went on to say, like, you once said that your fear lies in not following your conscience, not in consequences. Can you explain this? So he says, about a year and a half ago, my fear of any authority was trumped by my outrage at the casual murder that billions of animals suffer at the hands of speciesist human oppressors. It became trumped by my disgust in how humanity has become a plague of locusts upon Mother Earth, and it became trumped by the disgust I feel at Eurocentric Western civilization. At some point in time, if you truly care about animals, or Earth, or anarchism, feminism, queer rights, indigenous peoples, or anything, fear must take place on the back burner because it's the biggest prison of the mind that there is. Ultimately, that's why governments need to lock up people like Maxim Vetkin, Brulio Arturo Duran, Adrian Magdaleno Gonzalez, or myself, because we are not afraid. We lash out at the systems of abuse, and if we are not imprisoned and vilified or ignored by the media, then there is a very possible threat that others will become empowered. If everyone is empowered and truly taught to handle problems directly, then not only is it probable that they will not need the government, but it's certain that they will turn on it and destroy it. There really is no alternative. Your apathy and fear either outweigh your caring and compassion, or vice versa. The interviewer, INO, also points out there's a great deal of emphasis in our community on ideology and political correctness. Yeah, that can definitely hold us back. Let's all be real. So Walter says, and I underlined this really hardcore, the big roadblock to effectiveness is that everyone wants to be able to be viewed as a good person. This is understandable because many vegans do care, at least enough to change their consumer habits, but ultimately, effectiveness is what wins the end goal. Look at it this way. If a bully seeks to violate you and physically harm you, being a morally consistent and progressive individual will not stop you from getting your teeth kicked in. And I love this part. What's truly moral is saving an animal in a cage from death. If you have to lie, cheat, or steal to do that, so be it. If you have to break property or scare those directly responsible, so what? I wish it could be otherwise, but it cannot. Go ahead, talk with someone that makes money off of killing animals. They don't care. I would interject and say, usually they don't care. There are exceptions. There are, like, situations where people are just doing it because it's all they've known and they actually do, like, know it's wrong and want to change. But, generally, yeah, they don't care. Anyway, but you will find that when you start harming their pocketbook, you have their strict attention. So I also underlined this super, boldly, but, we need to arrive at a day where someone says, well, I think this, that, and the other, and everyone else's first reaction is, yeah, great, so what are you doing? Instead of, well, I disagree, I'm offended. So I also thought this part was interesting. He says in a different interview, it's important to become self-empowered as direct activists, because the leadership principle is a tool of the system. It plays directly into their hand. Contrary to what's portrayed, the government is not as concerned with groups of subversives as they make out. The more organization, the more people involved, the easier it is to infiltrate or monitor. One person acting alone has to either get caught in the act or make a fatal error. Even in the legal animal rights movement, we are led to believe that you need validation by affiliation. So I love this. The interviewer asks, what do you have to say to the critics of arson as a tactic in the animal liberation movement? And Walter answers, I would say they should be more concerned about the murder of animals and the earth than the application of arson as a tactic. Furthermore, I would say I believe in animal liberation, whatever it may take, not animal liberation as long as people think it's okay. This is the ALF, not Boy Scouts. Just because these critics will not employ arson as a solution doesn't mean it's wrong. So this is another really interesting quote. When I was a kid, everything was about the communists. Now the buzzword is terrorist. Like any Orwellian newspeak, the word terrorist has come to represent a whole spectrum of emotional fear instead of any rational definition. It's no surprise to me that ALF/ELF are considered terrorists. The U.S. government has been calling us that for 2 decades before 9/11. Because we are effective and can't be stopped, we get vilified. That's so interesting. The fact that people are calling any of these people terrorists is just so freaking ridiculous. If anything, they're anti-terror. They're anti the terror of animals and of humans. So it's just really frustrating. Abusers do this all the time where they accuse you of being what they are. I think we need to reserve the word terrorist for actual terrorists, such as, just as an example, the guy who went in and shot up the Pulse nightclub. You know, things like that. Not people who break inanimate objects or rescue animals. Like, come on. A quote, "Start feeling this movement with our hearts instead of our heads. By our hearts, I mean passion. When you see a terrible injustice, a profound evil, like what goes on in any animal use industry, the proper response is not fear or sadness. The proper response to evil is outrage. Our focus should be on justice, vegan justice." This is so true. I mean, we live in a society, a patriarchal society, where we just shit on feelings and invalidate feelings and emotions, and we numb people to the point where they're so desensitized, and violence is so normalized that the response is to just, like, give you a blank stare rather than feel the proper emotions that you should be feeling, like outrage. Like, emotions have been vilified, and it's so fucking frustrating. They're so invalidated. It's like, what the fuck? And as a result, our empathy is just not encouraged. It's squashed. It's sometimes non-existent. And then we're just all fucking apathetic robots that only use intellectualism and logic and never, like, consider empathy. To be clear, we need both. We can't just get rid of emotions. A short, simple quote that I underlined a lot is, "Liberation is the abolition of oppression." Another quote, "This government, that government, all government will always try to scare the many with the few, because the truly free, those with a feral heart, can light fires in their cities, even from behind their prison walls." More quotes. "We will never live in harmony with each other until we can live in harmony with the environment as well as other species." So true. Animals have the right to live free from human slavery, use, abuse, and death. It's not rocket science. It's very simple. Still, many factions, groups, and organizations in the past and present spend too much time politicking, people-pleasing, and paper-pushing. Their logic is flawed. Personal interest is the enemy of animal liberation. Our mandate is to defend their lives, the four-legged and the furry, those with wings and those with gills, not to smile and talk and play on people's sympathies. If people's sympathy was so power, then they would not engage in these horrors and slaveries to begin with. So true. Walter Bond also talks a lot about the movement needing to be cohesive, needing to have clarity on what the bottom lines are, and to not split up just because of petty differences in political ideologies or opinions. And it's so true. So here's another passage. "There are many ways you can help animals, but make no mistake, direct action is the most powerful. By direct action, I mean anything that helps animals now. I once knew a young woman who would travel the countryside of Colorado and go to places of animal abuse like ranches, turkey and chicken farms, and just act cute and repetitively ask for an animal over and over, persistently pretty pleased with sugar on top. She ended up with so many critters she had to purchase 30 acres to house everyone comfortably. That simple and legal action has had more profound of an effect than a million vegans at potlucks competing with each other about who feels the animal's pain the most. Or 100 activists that write me to tell me that they wish they could do what I have done. Saving actual animals' lives, costing animal abusers money, stopping the exploitation by any means necessary, educating people about the total abstinence from animal products, this is where our most successful efforts lay. Direct activism, legal or illegal, is morally justified and works. It saves life today instead of planting seeds or waiting for the ripple effects of a hopeful future." So, as of now, where is Walter? Well, he was released from prison after 10 years, and you can visit supportwalter.org. I'll link that for any updates, as well as other writings that I haven't even read yet that he's written since, because remember, this book, like all of these writings, are pretty much around like 2009 to 2011. So I'm sure he's written a lot since then. So check out that website. Apparently he's living in a halfway house as of September 2020, and he's doing well. And they also have a donation thing if you want to help him get like his life affairs in order and stuff. Ooh, another thing that I should have mentioned in the intro that I just remembered is that Joey Carpstrong is releasing an important film. I think it's going to be against the dairy industry, I'm not sure, but he's releasing that today, which is February 20th. It'll definitely be out by the time you hear this, but please do watch that and share that around and support that. As for me, stay tuned once again for my disruption, or go check it out because it's out by now that you're listening to this. Continue to come back to my podcast. I worked very hard on this. Share this podcast with anybody, vegan activist, or non-vegan. It doesn't matter. Check into my YouTube channel, Alicia Demi. Follow Stop the Violence on Instagram. Support my TikTok, Alicia Demi 44. All that shit. I already said all that though. Have a beautiful day. If you're not vegan yet, don't know why you would have made it this far, but if you're not, watch Dominion, a free documentary. Watch Dominion.com, Dominion Movement on YouTube. Listen to the TEDx talk, Every Argument Against Veganism. There you go. Have a beautiful day. Bye!